Last month, I had dinner with an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We met at a restaurant we both love. I arrived first, and while waiting, I found myself scrolling through social media on my phone. When my friend arrived, we hugged, sat down, and did what most people do without even thinking about it. We both placed our phones on the table. The conversation started with small talk, the usual stuff about traffic and weather. We ordered drinks, looked at the menu, made our choices. Then we started talking about real things. I asked how he'd been, what the last few years had been like. He told me about his divorce, the difficulty of being away from his son, his growing business. After he finished, he turned to me and asked the same question. And about 1 minute after I started talking, he picked up his phone. While I was speaking, he alternated his gaze between me and the screen, giving those generic responses. Yeah. Uh-huh. Cool. After a few minutes, I stopped talking, waited, and said in a friendly tone, "Hey man, take care of whatever you need to on your phone, I'll wait." He quickly typed something, put the phone back down, and apologized. I asked if everything was okay, if he needed to call someone. He said no, nothing important. We kept talking. The food arrived, and I noticed something fascinating. Every single time I was eating, every brief moment of silence, my friend grabbed his phone to look at something. Here's what shocked me most. This wasn't malicious behavior. He wasn't trying to be rude. He literally couldn't handle even 30 seconds of silence without reaching for stimulation. And this reveals something terrifying about what's happening to our brains. I saw this same pattern everywhere when I spent 4 hours at the DMV last year renewing my documents. As a neuroscientist, I love observing human behavior in these settings. While I sat waiting or standing in various lines, the vast majority of people around me were on their phones. This is the world we live in now, in line at the bakery, at the bank, during dinners and lunches, in any break during the workday. There it is, the phone, as the refuge of our minds. When I'm driving and stop at a red light, the light turns green and the car in front stays stopped. I look and usually that person is on their phone. The omnipresence of phones is inescapable. In my country, 89% of people over 10 years old own a cell phone. According to another study, people spend an average of 5 hours per day on their phones. If we consider 8 hours of sleep per night, this means people spend almost 1/3 of their waking hours on their phones. And when we're not on our phones, what are we doing? Scientific studies show that most people fill their free time with some type of stimulus. Screens, computer screens, television, Netflix, YouTube. And you know what all of this reveals? We have eliminated boredom from people's lives. Modern technologies, screen devices, have eliminated boredom from our daily lives. This might seem good, but it's actually terrible for our brains. But it's no wonder these technologies became so successful so quickly, because our brains hate boredom. Let me explain what boredom is first. Boredom is all the time you spend without any type of external stimulation, without directing your attention to something outside yourself, without performing a specific activity. It's time spent living only with your own thoughts. And as I said, our brains hate boredom. The proof comes from a curious and actually funny scientific study. Researchers from Harvard University conducted a series of studies published in the prestigious journal Science. These studies demonstrated that people spend most of their time seeking some type of external stimulus. But these scientists also showed that most people consider being alone with their own thoughts something unpleasant. When you give people the option of external stimulus, most consider any external stimulus much more pleasurable than being with their own thoughts. But then these researchers went deeper, and this is the funny part. They brought people into a room one at a time and gave them an electric shock, a painful shock. They asked, would you pay money to avoid this shock? Many people said yes. Then they selected only those people who said they'd pay to avoid the shock for the second phase. They put these people in an empty room, one at a time. No phone, no magazine, no screens. A completely boring white laboratory room without any external stimulus. Just a table with a button. The scientists gave this instruction. You must spend 15 minutes in this room trying to be alone with your thoughts. That's your goal. But if you want, you can press this button and receive that same shock from before. The results were incredible. 67% of men pressed the button 1 to 4 times on average, and 25% of women pressed it 1 to 9 times. These people preferred to receive a shock they would pay to avoid, rather than spend 15 minutes alone with their thoughts. This clearly demonstrates how much we avoid boredom and how bad boredom feels to our brains. Now you understand why technologies that eliminate boredom were adopted so quickly. People love anything that takes them away from boredom. And why is this a problem? Because nothing in your brain is absolute. Everything in your brain is relative. The brain interprets things in relation to each other. Modern technologies, screen technologies, social media, Netflix, and similar services don't just occupy your mind. You must agree that things occupy your mind in different ways. You can occupy your mind going to the gym to exercise. You can occupy your mind reading a good book, taking a course that's important for your personal or professional growth. Or you can occupy your mind scrolling on TikTok or Instagram, binge-watching series on Netflix. There are different ways to occupy your mind. And the technologies that occupy your mind through screens tend to occupy your mind through hyperstimulation. Hyperstimulation is a stimulus artificially constructed to generate very intense activation of your brain's reward system, your motivation and desire system. Fast food, ultra-processed food, highly palatable and delicious food are examples of hyperstimuli in eating. It's no coincidence that with some chocolate and chips it's impossible to eat just one. They were engineered, created to intensely activate the motivation, desire, and pleasure circuits of your brain. The issue is that modern screen technologies, such as social media, are sources of informational hyperstimuli. These technologies offer an information bombardment, a large volume of information transmitted to you with extreme emotional intensity, with movement, with speed, in formats extremely engaging for your brain. The psychological engagement you have when you're on social media or watching Netflix is much higher than the psychological engagement you'd have reading a book or training at the gym. You should know that these technology companies like Meta, which owns Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, Alphabet, which owns YouTube, or ByteDance, which owns TikTok, these companies have the highest caliber behavioral scientists on their payroll. I'm talking about neuroscientists, psychologists, and so on. And you know what these scientists' job is? It's literally to build an algorithm that will show you what will keep you glued to the screen for the maximum possible time. This isn't a secret, it's public information, including disclosed by people who work or worked at these companies. Curiously, even Netflix has created criteria for series and films on the platform. Criteria, for example, so you can watch the movie or series while using your phone at the same time. Criteria involving not having long dialogues. Criteria involving not staying in the same shot, using moving scenes, not staying in the same scene for too long, changing scenes frequently, and so on. All of this for what? To hyperstimulate and engage your brain. The big issue here is that your brain is engaged through processes that are deeply emotional and unconscious. We're not talking about intellectual, rational, conscious engagement. We're talking about engagement that's emotional and unconscious. We humans cannot forget that we are biological beings, we are animals, we are part of the animal kingdom, and inside us live systems and biological processes that are deeply animalistic. I joke with my students. I say it's the inner beast inside all of us. It's the inner beast in you that wants to eat that wonderful pizza instead of going to the gym or eating vegetables and salad. It's the inner beast that desires that wrong person through deeply irrational passion. The inner beast is what our emotional drives lead us to do. It's not our consciousness, our rationality, our prudence. The big issue here is that the algorithms of these technologies that want you glued to a screen at all costs, these algorithms are directed at your inner beast, at the biological, drive-based, emotional processes inside you, and they're very efficient at this. Instagram announced last week that it reached 3 billion active users. 3 billion with a B. Can you imagine that number? 37% of the world's population is on Instagram. These algorithms work. They're very good at what they do. If you've ever caught yourself losing minutes or sometimes even hours of your day scrolling on social media, if you've ever caught yourself binge-watching a Netflix series or some other platform, if you've ever caught yourself regretting the time you've spent in front of a screen, it's because you're certainly already being affected by all this. What I'd like you to understand is that this hyperstimulation is nothing more than a very conscious construction by these companies to hijack your brain's motivation and desire systems, which are deeply emotional and unconscious brain circuits inside you. And the result is that you don't even consciously perceive that these technologies are affecting your life with great intensity, with a lot of psychological engagement, all to glue you to a screen, which is the ultimate goal of these platforms. Did you know that these gurus, the owners and top executives of technology companies, don't usually allow their children to use phones and social media when young? Many don't allow it even in adolescence or at minimum severely limit it. The children of these tech bosses attend schools that prohibit this type of technology. And all this isn't for nothing. The younger you are, the greater the probability that this hyperstimulation will literally reconfigure your brain for the worse. All this means that our brains today are accustomed to hyperstimulation. Hyperstimulation has become the rule. It has become the commonplace of stimuli that occupy most people's minds most of the time. The issue is that the amount of psychological engagement you have when you binge watch an engaging Netflix series is simply incomparable. Or when you spend time on social media scrolling, or when you play video games, which is another source of hyperstimulation. It's incomparable to you sitting down to read a book, a difficult book, a long text that's capable of expanding your intellect's horizons. The big issue is that hyperstimulation is much more engaging than any other type of stimulus we had before these technologies. And our brains are increasingly accustomed to this hyperstimulation. As I told you, the brain works with contrasts, with comparisons relatively, comparing one thing to another. And everything nowadays, everything you do, everything you want to do, is living in contrast, in comparison to what? To this hyperstimulation of screens and technologies. Your brain compares everything you do and everything you want to do to these hyperstimuli because your brain is accustomed to them. Next to these technologies, any other stimulus is weak, boring, demotivating. And here we have the big issue. You may have heard out there that people don't want to change. It turns out this is a lie. Most people do want to change. Most people want to change their lives, change their professional and financial level, read more, learn more, exercise regularly, achieve a healthy body, eat better, and so on. Many people even know what they need to do to achieve a better life. The problem is that these people can't force themselves to do these things. Sometimes you even start doing what needs to be done, but you can't continue. You can't maintain consistency. Whether to start or to continue, you feel inside you a thing, a resistance, a difficulty doing what needs to be done, even knowing what you need to do. And the name for this, you know, is procrastination. But now you already know, your brain is accustomed to hyperstimulation. All these things you know you need to do are much less interesting and motivating for your brain than the hyperstimuli your brain is accustomed to. And it's not that you think this consciously. It's not that you, for example, want to go to the gym or read a book and you consciously think, oh, Netflix is much more stimulating for my mind or video games are much more motivating or something like that. That's not what happens. These processes, as I said, are largely unconscious emotional processes. What you feel, what you perceive, is a resistance, a difficulty doing the things you need to do. These things seem really very difficult to you, but this is nothing more than your brain operating in contrast, in comparison. It got used to that intense motivation, that quick and easy motivation coming from hyperstimuli. Why would you find reading a book enjoyable if you can turn on Netflix or pull out your phone or play video games? Reading isn't a quick and easy experience. To read with quality, you need to reserve time. To understand deeply, you need to face the discomfort of difficult paragraphs and chapters and authors. The same goes for the gym or any other thing you need to do that isn't quick or easy. Netflix is quick and easy, instant motivation and pleasure, phone too, video games too. But beyond that, hyperstimuli are intense. The intensity, the emotional power of these things is much greater than that of a book or the gym. When you accustom your brain to what's quick, easy, and intense, it will use this as a ruler to regulate your motivation. In other words, the pattern of your motivation will be based on comparison with these hyperstimuli. And the result is that if it's not quick, easy, and intense, you'll feel enormous resistance to do it. This is the first reason you need to feel boredom, because boredom is a reset of all this. Boredom regulates your brain's motivation, desire, and pleasure systems, so you can feel desire and pleasure again for things that aren't quick, easy, and intense. If you spend a month without hyperstimuli, without Netflix or streaming, without video games, without social media, or preferably without a phone except for what's essential, without pornography, which is a very harmful hyperstimulus when you accustom your brain to it, without overdoing coffee, just 1 cup of coffee per day before noon, without ultra-processed food that's super tasty and you know is bad for you, eating only real food. During this month, set aside some time every day to do nothing, Be alone with your thoughts. Go to the gym without your phone, without listening to music. Public transport without phone, without music. Walking on the street without phone, without music. Exercise, just like you train a muscle, your capacity to be alone with your thoughts. It will be uncomfortable, I guarantee. It will be unpleasant, especially at first. But if you spend a month doing this every day, you'll return to having desire to read and pleasure with reading, desire to train and pleasure with physical exercise, desire to eat a tasty fruit, healthy food. After this regulation, the music you listen to on public transport or at the gym will be much more pleasant. Boredom will reset. It will change your brain's ruler and you'll feel motivated again and feel pleasure with these things that today seem boring. After this reset month, be careful not to return to the same habits as before. Continue putting periods of intentional, purposeful boredom in your week. At least 2 or 3 times a week, spend 30 minutes to an hour doing nothing. Just you and your thoughts. You can do this at the gym, on the treadmill. Buy earplugs. You know, those really cheap ones, noise protectors, to reduce the noise you hear, so you can be more in silence even if the gym is noisy and full. Do the treadmill or maybe the entire workout just you and your thoughts. If you use the gym for this, you'll exercise your body and your boredom at the same time. It's a great strategy. But there are other benefits of boredom in your life beyond regulating your brain's motivation and desire systems, beyond combating your procrastination. When you live with your thoughts without doing anything, without any type of external stimulus, without paying attention to anything, this activates a brain circuitry called the default mode network. In other words, it's the network of neurons that's active when the brain is in default mode, not doing anything specific, not focusing on anything specific. Perhaps you imagine this network isn't doing anything, but that's a big mistake. The brain is working hard when the default mode network is active, and this network is associated with a series of important functions for our lives. This brain circuitry is very important for introspection, for you to reflect on your own emotions, your own thoughts, your own internal life. It's important for integrating your personal memories with future scenarios, integrating your past with your present, with your future plans. It participates in your ability to reflect on your important relationships and your capacity to put yourself in other people's shoes, to try to imagine inside you what other people think and feel. It's involved in processing information, meanings, your capacity to interpret words conceptually. And all this makes the default mode network fundamental for various aspects of human life. First, for the cohesion of yourself, your identity over time. After all, it's this network, this circuitry that connects past, present, and future. It gives narrative continuity to your life. Second, for your capacity to plan and your perspective-taking involving other people. It allows you to simulate scenarios inside you, to get, in quotes, inside other human beings' heads. And this is central for you to imagine and predict what will happen in your important relationships, for you to cooperate with other people, for you to intelligently decide things involving your relationships, whether personal or professional. Third, attribution of meaning. This network integrates knowledge, semantics, your life experiences. It gives meaning to situations, and this is the basis for communication, learning, and intentional creativity. You have your best ideas when this network is active. And if you've already had good ideas taking a shower or something similar, when you weren't focused on anything specific, you already know the reason. And perhaps you think creativity isn't something useful for you. After all, you're not an artist. You don't work directly with creativity. But this is a very limited and naive vision of creativity's role in human life. No matter your profession, creativity is fundamental for your life. If you have difficult problems to solve, personal problems, professional problems, financial problems, relationship problems, creativity is the competence that allows you to think of different solutions, effective solutions to solve these problems. Without creativity, you're limited to a life where you can only solve problems with other people's ideas or using ideas you had in your past. When you eliminate boredom, you eliminate one of the main moments where the default mode network is active. You lose, at least in part, these benefits I just mentioned. And it's no wonder that if you eliminate boredom from your life, you tend to be a more unhappy person, with greater risk of depression and anxiety, less satisfied with your life in general. You can live tired all the time and also procrastinate a lot. Your challenge is simple. Determine a time every day to stay away from your phone, away from tablet, away from computer. It doesn't help to do this occasionally, it needs to be daily. Regulate your environment. Make it difficult in your environment to use these devices or seek hyperstimuli. Leave your phone charging far from you, for example, far from your bed when you're sleeping. Install apps that limit your usage time. Make difficult what hyperstimulates and easy what transforms you into a better person. And above all, don't stop observing your life. Don't accept living on automatic mode. Can you handle staying half an hour alone with your own thoughts, doing nothing? These are questions you need to always ask yourself. The world today is configured to encourage hyperstimulation. If you don't stop to reflect, to question, and row against this tide, you'll become accustomed to hyperstimulation because this is the operating mode of the current world. Either you awaken and row against this, or you'll be carried by this harmful tendency. A life unexamined is not worth living. An unexamined life is a life where you fatally end up living other people's lives, following the flow of what society or other people encourage and impose on you. The question that remains is all this good for you, for your family, for your personal and professional growth? Is this improving your life? It's up to us to know how to discern these things, because I guarantee you these technology companies will do absolutely nothing that could decrease the time you stay glued to screens.